She vowed never to trust a human, but in a desert, vows mean nothing. The first thing Kale Riven tasted was sand. Dry, bitter, and absolutely everywhere. He coughed, spitting out a mouthful of grit as consciousness slammed back into him like a faulty reactor core. His head throbbed in rhythm with a distant rumble of shifting dunes, and the acrid scent of burnt metal filled his lungs. "Great landing, Kale," he muttered to himself, blinking against the blinding twin suns overhead. The wreckage of his drop shuttle lay scattered across the golden expanse of Varith 9, half buried and smoking like it was embarrassed to still exist. A low growl vibrated through the sand beneath him. Kale froze. That wasn't a shuttle. Slowly, he turned his head. About 30 meters away, the sand rippled, moving against the wind's direction. His gut tightened. Dune stalkers. He'd read the briefings, apex predators, invisible until they weren't, and very interested in anything warm, bleeding, or stupid enough to crash land in their territory. Of course, Kale sighed, pushing himself up with a wince. His left arm screamed in protest, probably dislocated. No time for that now. A glint of silver blue caught his eye amid the wreckage. At first, he thought it was another piece of twisted hull plating. Then it moved. Crawling, no, dragging herself, was a figure encased in shattered bio-armor, elegant even in ruin. The faint pulse of alien energy flickered along the seams before dying out completely. Kale's heart sank. An Arvenis commander. He recognized the royal insignia scorched onto her shoulder plate. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, stumbling toward her. She looked up, her piercing eyes locking onto his with a mixture of disdain and defiance, as if being half dead was merely an inconvenience. Blood dark violet trickled down her temple, contrasting sharply against her luminous blue skin. "Stay back, human," she hissed, voice laced with venom despite her condition. Kale glanced over his shoulder. The sand was rippling closer now, like a predator savoring its approach. "Yeah, hate to break it to you, princess," he said, crouching beside her, "but unless you've got a secret weapon hidden in that fancy armor, we've got bigger problems." She tried to push him away, but her strength faltered. "I don't need your help." The ground beneath them vibrated harder, a shadow forming under the surface. Kale offered a tight grin, masking the adrenaline spike in his veins. "Look, we can argue about species superiority later. Right now, I'm your best chance at not becoming monster lunch." Without waiting for permission, he hooked his good arm under her shoulder, ignoring her glare that could have melted titanium. The moment he lifted her, the sand behind them erupted, jagged claws slicing through the air where Syria had been seconds before. "Move now, complain later." Kale barked, half carrying, half dragging her toward the nearest piece of wreckage large enough to offer cover. The dune stalker burst fully from the sand, a grotesque blend of reptilian muscle and insectoid armor, its mandibles clicking hungrily. It let out a screech that rattled Kale's teeth. "You call that camouflage? I've seen better stealth tech on junkyard drones," Kale quipped, ducking behind a fractured engine casing just as the creature lunged. Syria struggled in his grip, her pride clearly more wounded than her body. "Unhand me, human. I am about to die if you don't shut up and let me think," Kale cut in, peeking over the edge. The creature circled, its senses locked onto the residual energy from Syria's armor. Kale's mind raced. No weapons. One arm useless. One very annoyed alien commander. His gaze fell on a sparking conduit nearby. "All right, princess," he said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the situation. "How do you feel about being live bait?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Explain." "Now. Simple. Your armor's leaking just enough energy to keep that thing interested. We lead it toward that conduit, I trigger an overload, and boom, fried sand lizard." Sirius sneered. "Primitive and reckless." "Works for me," Kale shrugged. "On 3, you run left. I'll handle the fireworks." "I do not run from lesser creatures," she snapped. Another screech, closer this time. Kale raised a brow. "You'd rather be digested with dignity?" A beat of silence. Then, with a frustrated growl, Sirion nodded. 3. Kale shouted, not bothering to count properly. They bolted, Sirius stumbling but keeping pace as the dune stalker roared and gave chase. Kale veered toward the conduit, sparks dancing at his feet. He yanked a loose cable free with his good hand, the heat biting into his palm. Come on," he muttered, waiting for the beast to close in. At the last second, he jammed the cable into the sand, right as the creature lunged. The explosion was more of a violent flash, lightning arcing through the monster's body, sending it crashing to the ground in a smoking heap. Kale collapsed beside the sizzling remains, chest heaving. Sirial limped over, glaring down at him like he defended her ancestors. "Reckless," she repeated. Kale flashed a grin up at her. "Effective, though." She looked away, arms crossed despite her visible exhaustion. "Do not think this makes us allies, human." "Wouldn't dream of it," Kale replied, dragging himself to his feet. "But unless you've got a better idea, we're stuck together until we get off this sandpit." Sirius' silence was answer enough. As the twin suns began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the dunes, Kale couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. "Strangers in the sand," he muttered. "Let's hope we live long enough to hate each other properly." The desert didn't answer, but the distant rumble beneath their feet suggested that more predators were already on their trail. The desert changed when the suns began to fall. Kale Riven could feel it, not just the drop in temperature, but the way the wind carried a different kind of silence. The kind that warned every living thing to find shelter or become part of the sand. "We need cover now," Kale muttered, scanning the endless dunes for anything resembling safety. Siria Valcor walked beside him, or rather limped, her bio-armor flickering erratically with dying pulses of blue light. Pride kept her upright, but even pride had limits. "I don't run from this planet's creatures," she said through gritted teeth. Kale shot her a sideways glance, hoisting a salvaged metal panel over his shoulder. "Good news, I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to survive." Behind them, the sand shifted not with the playful breeze of the day, but in deep, heavy waves, as if something beneath was waking up. Siria's gaze hardened, her alien eyes scanning the horizon. Sand Leviathan. Kale didn't need her to explain. The stories were enough. A predator the size of a dropship, moving beneath the dunes, hunting by vibration and heat. "Yeah, I figured," he said, his voice lower now, almost afraid the air itself would betray them. They reached a jagged outcrop, twisted remains of a cargo hold half swallowed by sand. Kale pointed to it. There. We dig in, stay quiet, and hope it's not hungry enough to peel us out. Scifi hesitated, then nodded, too tired to argue, too smart to deny the danger. Minutes later, they crouched beneath a metal husk, Kale using scraps of wiring and shards of reflective alloy to set up a crude perimeter. He scattered bits of tech farther out, creating false heat signatures with a few sparks of residual energy. Scifi watched him work, her breathing uneven. You improvise like a scavenger? Thanks, Kale whispered, wiping sweat and sand from his brow. Where I'm from, scavenger is just another word for still alive. The sun finally disappeared beyond the dunes. Darkness wasn't peaceful here, it was suffocating. And then they heard it. A deep, resonating hum beneath the ground, followed by the faint hiss of sand shifting unnaturally. Kale held his breath. Scifi's armor pulsed once too loud in the silence. Kale's head snapped toward her. Turn that thing off. It's not responding, she whispered, fingers dancing over the holographic interface on her wrist. Panic, real panic, flashed in her eyes for the first time. The hum grew closer. A ridge of sand began to rise and fall, moving toward their position with terrifying grace. Kale slid closer to her, his voice barely audible. If that armor keeps pinging, we're dead. I know, she hissed back, frustration bleeding through her calm facade. Without thinking, Kale reached out, prying open a maintenance panel on her arm. Hold still. What are you? Saving your royal backside, he muttered, rewiring two flickering nodes and yanking free a glowing capacitor. The armor dimmed instantly, the hum of energy fading to a whisper. Scifi stared at him, shock and something else, respect, maybe flickering across her features. Kale offered a tight grin. There. You're officially less shiny. Before she could retort, the sand beside their shelter exploded upward, just a faint burst, but enough to see the outline beneath. A shadow the size of a building slid past them, silent but for the cascade of grains falling in its wake. Kale didn't dare move. His muscles screamed to run, but instinct told him that even a heartbeat too loud could mean death. Scifi's hand, ungloved now, pressed lightly against his arm, a silent command to stay still. They watched as the sand leviathan circled, drawn toward the scattered heat signatures Kale had planted. It paused near a sparking conduit fragment, the sand rippling around its partially exposed carapace. Kale whispered, "Come on, take the bait." The creature lunged, devouring the false signal in a shower of sand and debris. For a moment, it thrashed, confused by the lack of real prey. Then, the ground stilled. Kale and Scifi waited seconds, stretching into minutes. Finally, the distant rumble began to fade, the Leviathan moving on in search of easier targets. Kale let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and slumped back against the metal wall. "Well," he whispered, "that was fun." Scifi didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was distant, focused on where the creature had vanished. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "You were effective." Kale smirked, turning his head toward her. "Careful, Commander." Sounds dangerously close to a compliment. She met his eyes, the usual sharpness dulled by exhaustion. Don't get used to it. The wind picked up, carrying the cold bite of desert night. Cale reached into his pack, pulling out a thin emergency blanket more symbolic than useful. Without a word, he tossed it over Sirius's shoulders. She stiffened at first but didn't remove it. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "Yeah, well," Cale said, leaning back and gazing up at the star-streaked sky, "I figured if we're stuck here, keeping you alive benefits both of us." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't as hostile as before. The kind of silence shared by people who had looked death in the eye and, for now, survived. Cale closed his eyes, letting the cool air wash over him. "When the sand moves," he muttered, more to himself than to her, "you run." Beside him, Sirius's voice was barely a whisper. "Noted." Above them, the stars watched in silence as two unlikely allies braced for whatever horrors the next night would bring. The first warning was the flicker. Sirius Valkor's bio-armor, already battered and dim from their desert ordeal, pulsed violently before locking into a rigid state. Cale Riven noticed the change immediately. The faint hum became a sharp whine, and Sirius's breath hitched. "What's wrong?" Cale asked, already knowing the answer. "The failsafe, it's engaging," Sirius muttered, her voice strained. "Energy overload. The suit is sealing." Cale swore under his breath. They had just found refuge in a crumbling cave carved into the canyon wall, a relic of some ancient civilization, offering momentary escape from the unforgiving suns. Now, Sirius stood frozen, her armor hardening like a coffin around her. Her hands twitched, trying to access the control panel on her forearm, but the interface was dead. Cale could see it panic, carefully masked behind a stoic facade, but there nonetheless. "You're running out of air in there, aren't you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Cale stepped closer, his usual smirk absent. "All right, Commander. No time for pride. I'm getting you out of that thing." Sirius's eyes snapped to his, a flicker of fear buried beneath layers of defiance. "You don't understand. This armor isn't just protection. It's identity. Right now, it's a death trap," Cale countered, already circling behind her. "And I happen to like you breathing." His fingers traced along the seams of the bio-armor, searching for a manual release. The material shifted under his touch, organic metal responding like tense muscle. He found a hidden port beneath her shoulder blade and pried it open. "This is inappropriate," Sirius muttered, her voice softer now, not out of protest but out of something closer to vulnerability. "Yeah, well, so is suffocating," Cale replied, focusing on the alien circuitry glowing faintly inside. "You're just going to have to trust me." A tense silence followed, Sirius's pride warring with survival instinct. Finally, she gave the smallest nod. Cale worked quickly, bypassing conduits and disabling the neural locks. One wrong move and the suit could trigger a permanent shutdown or worse. His hands moved with surprising care, the usual sarcasm replaced by quiet determination. With a final twist of exposed wiring, the armor let out a hiss like a dying creature. The plates along Sirius's back disengaged, folding away in segments until they collapsed to the ground with a dull thud. Cale stepped back, breath catching in his throat. Gone was the imposing figure of the Arvenis commander. Standing before him was Syria, her blue skin marked by long, pale scars tracing her shoulders and spine. She wore a simple, form-fitting bodysuit beneath the armor, functional and devoid of any royal insignia. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Syria's arms wrapped around herself not out of modesty, but as if shielding something far deeper. "There," Kale said quietly, breaking the silence. "Told you I could do it." Her gaze remained fixed on the cave wall, unable or unwilling to meet his eyes. "Do you see now?" she whispered. "Without the armor, I'm nothing special." Kale frowned, stepping into her line of sight. "That's where you're wrong." She finally looked at him, and in her eyes, he didn't see the usual arrogance or disdain. He saw exhaustion, fear, humanity if the word even applied. Kale sank down onto a nearby stone, gesturing for her to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, she joined him, the discarded armor a silent sentinel beside them. "You ever wonder," Kale began, his tone lighter but sincere, "why humans don't wear fancy suits like yours?" Syria arched a brow, curiosity breaking through her guarded expression. "Because," he continued, picking up a small stone and tossing it between his hands, "if we wrapped ourselves in tech every time things got hard, we'd forget who we are underneath." She let out a dry, almost bitter laugh. "Must be nice not having a galaxy expecting perfection from you." Kale's gaze softened. "Perfection's overrated. Survival's better." The cave grew quiet again, save for the distant howl of desert wind echoing through ancient tunnels. Syria's fingers traced absent-mindedly over one of her scars. "I was 8 cycles old when they fitted me with my first armor," she said, voice distant. "Not for protection but to ensure I looked the part of a Valkor. Smiles calibrated, posture corrected. Every movement monitored." Kale listened, sensing how rare this confession was. "Sounds exhausting," he murmured. "It was," she admitted. "Still is." They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken thoughts settling between them. After a while, Kale nudged her gently with his elbow. "You know, for what it's worth, I think you're more impressive without the armor." Syria's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to count. "And you," she replied, "are far less irritating when you're not talking." Kale chuckled, leaning back against the cool stone. "I'll take that as progress." As the night deepened and the stars emerged beyond the cracks in the cave ceiling, something shifted between them. Not alliance, not friendship, but understanding, the fragile beginning of trust forged not in battle, but in vulnerability. Syria closed her eyes, allowing herself, for once, to simply exist without the weight of expectation. Kale watched her for a moment before leaning his head back, a rare quiet settling over him. Beneath the armor, beneath titles and species, they were just two souls trying to survive a world that didn't care who they were. And for now, that was enough. The first flash of blue lightning split the sky without warning. Kale Riven jolted awake, the air around him charged with static. The ancient cave that had sheltered them now trembled under the weight of the coming storm. Not just wind and sand, this was something worse. Syria Valkor was already on her feet, her silver braid whipping in the rising gusts. Without her armor, she looked smaller, but Kale knew better now. The glow in her eyes wasn't fear, it was recognition. "Electromagnetic storm," she said, her voice tense. "And it's bringing company?" Cale didn't need to ask. As the second bolt lit up the canyon, he saw them, ghostly figures shimmering in the distance, their forms barely solid. Storm wraiths. Living plasma, born from the storm itself, drifting closer with every pulse of lightning. "Of course," Cale muttered, grabbing a metal rod to ground himself. Because surviving one kind of monster wasn't enough. They backed deeper into the cave, but Siria's gaze snapped toward the entrance as another shadow appeared, this one far more real. A squad of figures emerged through the swirling sand and static, armor dark and insignias stripped. At their front walked a tall man draped in a tattered cloak, his presence commanding even through the chaos. Siria's breath caught. "Rylan." Cale followed her gaze, noting the resemblance. The same sharp features, the same defiant stance, but where Siria held controlled strength, Rylan radiated ruthless conviction. "You always did find the worst places to hide," Rylan called out, his voice carrying unnaturally clear through the storm. Siria stepped forward, shoulders squared despite the biting wind. "I wasn't hiding." Rylan's lips curved into something between a smirk and a sneer. "No, I suppose not. Running, perhaps? Or finally realizing that the Dominion you served was never worth your loyalty." Cale moved to stand beside her, but Siria held up a hand. This was her battle. "What do you want, Rylan?" "To bring you home," he said simply, gesturing to the rebels behind him. "You don't belong crawling through dirt with a human, sister. Join us. Help rebuild something real." Before Siria could answer, another figure stepped from the shadows, a human in patched mercenary gear, familiar in the worst way. Cale's jaw tightened. "Torin Dax." "Miss me, Cale." Torin grinned, spinning a pulse pistol on his finger. "Didn't think I'd find you playing bodyguard to royalty?" Cale's grip on his improvised weapon tightened. "Didn't think you'd sink low enough to work for exiles." "Credits don't care who's paying," Torin shrugged. "But hey, no hard feelings. Just business." Siria's eyes flicked between the two men before settling back on Rylan. "I'm not the naive girl you left behind. I see what you're doing. You don't want freedom. You want power." Rylan's expression hardened. "Power is the only language our enemies understand. Don't pretend you're above it. You wore that armor like a second skin." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the tension etched across Siria's face. Cale could see it, the pull of family, of shared blood and history, warring against everything she'd come to believe. "You don't have to die here," Rylan said, stepping closer. "But choose carefully. The storm won't wait forever." A shriek echoed through the canyon as a storm wraith drifted dangerously close, its tendrils of energy licking at the rocks. Cale leaned in, his voice low but steady. "Whatever you decide, Siria, I'm with you." She glanced at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, the weight of her choice crystallized. Turning back to Rylan, her voice was clear, unwavering. "I choose my own path. Not yours. Not theirs. Mine." Rylan's eyes darkened. "Then you've chosen death." With a sharp gesture, his soldiers raised their weapons. Torin leveled his pistol at Cale, smirking. "Sorry, mate. Looks like this is where we part ways." "Yeah," Kale replied, his tone bitterly amused. "You always did have terrible timing." Before the first shot was fired, the storm answered for them. A bolt of raw energy struck nearby, sending shockwaves through the ground. The storm wraiths descended, drawn to the conflict, their crackling forms weaving between friend and foe alike. Chaos erupted. Kale yanked Sci-Fi behind a stone pillar as plasma blasts lit up the cave entrance. Torin fired wildly, cursing as a wraith passed through one of Reelan's men, leaving only scorched armor behind. "We need a plan," Kale shouted over the din. Sci-Fi's eyes darted to the remnants of her armor. "If I can reactivate the core, I can generate a pulse strong enough to repel the wraiths, but it'll expose us to Reelan's forces." Kale grinned despite the madness. Better than being fried by walking lightning. As Sci-Fi worked, Kale provided cover, hurling debris and firing stolen weapons at anything that moved. Torin advanced, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Give it up, Kale. You're outnumbered and outgunned again." "Yeah," Kale called back, blasting a wraith off course, "but I've got something you don't." "Oh? And what's that?" A deep hum filled the air as Sci-Fi triggered the armor core, blue light radiating outward in a shockwave. Kale said, diving for cover. The pulse swept through the battlefield, scattering the storm wraiths like mist in the wind. Several of Reelan's soldiers collapsed, their systems fried by the surge. When the light faded, only Reelan, Torin, and a handful of rebels remained standing. Breathing hard, Sci-Fi rose, her eyes locking onto her brother. "This isn't over," Reelan spat, signaling retreat as the storm began to dissipate. Kale watched them vanish into the swirling dust, then turned to Sci-Fi. "You all right?" She nodded, though her gaze lingered on the spot where Reelan had stood. Kale placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You made the right choice." Sci-Fi exhaled slowly. "I hope so." As the last echoes of thunder faded, they stood together amidst the ruins, betrayed, battered, but unbroken. And somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn threatened to break through the storm. The desert was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that came before something monumental. Kale Riven and Sci-Fi Valcor stood atop a ridge of scorched sand, the remnants of battle scattered behind them. Smoke curled lazily from broken weapons and fried circuits. Above, the storm clouds were finally retreating, leaving a sky bruised with fading lightning. "There it is," Kale muttered, pointing toward the jagged silhouette of an ancient power relay half buried in the dunes. "Our ticket out of this mess or straight into it?" Sci-Fi's eyes narrowed, calculating. "The core's unstable. If we trigger it, the electromagnetic pulse will wipe every system within kilometers. That includes Reelan's forces, and any creature drawn to their tech." "And us?" Kale asked, already knowing the answer. "If we time it right, we'll be at the edge of the blast radius." Her tone was calm, but Kale caught the subtle tension beneath. Together, they descended toward the relay, an ancient monolith of alien design, humming faintly with dormant power. As they reached its base, Kale ran his fingers over the etched symbols. "Think your royal codes still work on this relic?" Sci-Fi stepped forward, placing her hand against a central panel. Her bracelet lit up, syncing with the ancient device. Slowly, the core began to awaken, pulsing with a deep blue glow. "They'll work," she said, though Kale sensed it wasn't certainty, it was determination. In the distance, dust trails signaled the return of Ryland's forces. Hovercrafts and plasma bikes cutting across the desert, unaware of the trap being set. "They are coming fast," Kale warned. "No pressure." "I don't need pressure," Sireo replied, her fingers dancing over the interface. "I need choice." The core roared to life, vibrations rattling the ground beneath them. Energy surged through ancient conduits, lighting up the desert floor like veins of lightning. Kale watched as Sireo stood at the heart of it all, no armor, no titles, just a woman rewriting her fate. "You ready?" he asked, stepping beside her. She glanced at him, a small but genuine smile breaking through the usual stoicism. "We fight. We choose. We live." Kale smirked. "Now that's a motto I can get behind." As Ryland's lead hovercraft crested the nearest dune, Sireo slammed her palm onto the activation panel. The world exploded in light. A wave of pure energy erupted outward, tearing through sand, metal, and circuitry alike. Hovercrafts disintegrated mid-air, storm wraiths evaporated in flashes of plasma, and every weapon, every COMM, every powered device was silenced in an instant. Kale and Sireo hit the ground just as the shockwave passed over them, far enough to survive, but close enough to feel the raw force ripple through their bones. When the brightness faded, silence returned, this time, true silence. Kale pushed himself up, coughing through the settling dust. Around them, the desert was littered with the carcasses of dead machines and stunned rebels. Sireo rose beside him, her braid loosened, her bodysuit torn but her gaze steady. In the distance, Ryland stood amidst the wreckage, his cloak burned at the edges, his expression a mix of rage and reluctant respect. For a long moment, brother and sister stared at each other across the battlefield, no words left to exchange, only the weight of choices made. Ryland turned away, gathering the few survivors and disappearing into the horizon. Kale exhaled, breaking the heavy silence. "Well, that was dramatic." Before Sireo could respond, a low hum echoed overhead. A sleek dropship pierced through the dissipating clouds, the emblem of the Dominion gleaming faintly on its hull. "Rescue parties here," Kale noted, shielding his eyes from the descending craft. As the ship landed, Dominion officers emerged, their pristine uniforms stark against the chaos of the battlefield. One approached Sireo, saluting sharply. "Commander Valcor, we're here to escort you back to the capital." Sireo didn't return the salute. Instead, she looked at Kale. "I'm not returning as who I was," she said quietly. "And I won't let them decide who I'll be next." Kale raised a brow. "You got a plan?" She nodded once. "I've submitted a request, a personal advisor. Someone who sees beyond protocol. Someone who knows how to survive when rules fall apart." Realization dawned on Kale. "You're serious?" Sireo stepped closer, her voice softer now. "You stood by me when I had nothing, not even my armor. I want you at my side, Kale. Not as a soldier. As a partner." For once, Kale was speechless. Then, a slow grin spread across his face. "Well, when you put it like that, how could I refuse?" The two walked toward the dropship together, leaving behind the wreckage, the storm, and the ghosts of old allegiances. As they boarded, Cale glanced back at the endless desert. "You know," he said, "most engineers don't end up rewriting intergalactic politics." Sirius smirked. "Most commanders don't end up trusting humans." The ramp closed behind them, and the ship lifted off, rising above a battlefield that no longer defined them. In the vast expanse of stars ahead, they didn't just survive. They chose to live.